Hey Nate. Today we are going to be talking about resources, natural resources, and the industries that are dependent on those natural resources. We're going to be talking about the primary industries, of which there are three: farming, fishing and forestry, and mining. Those three. There are also secondary um, uh, industries that are referred to or divided up into construction and manufacturing. And then the third one is called the tertiary. Tertiary just meaning the third. Primary, secondary, tertiary. Tertiary being three. I kind of refer to them as the service industries. And we'll talk about more what they are when we get to them, but they don't really include natural resources like the first two do. So today we'll be talking about the primary resources or primary industries of farming, fishing and forestry, and mining. Agriculture has basically two different categories: one that has to do with farming, and the other that has to do with animal husbandry. Farming, if we would look at a climate map and a land use map, we would notice two things: that crops are raised in moderate climates, and herds of animals are raised in sub-arid climates, where farming can't really take place because the growing season is not long enough. Very little agriculture takes place in either the tropics or in the cold climates. But hunting and gathering and fishing, they certainly are utilized by the people that live in those semi-arid climates. While hunting wild animals and fishing are part of the food supply, farming is the method that has supplied most of the Earth's food supply. Kind of a thing to remember. Farming is the method that supplies and has always supplied the majority of the Earth's food supply. I said it twice, so what does that probably mean? Probably something to try to remember. Subsistence farmers refers to farmers who produce just enough food to supply their own family's needs. There are still many, many subsistence farmers in the world. Not so many in the United States, but certainly in other parts of the world, there are subsistence farmers that are basically just supplying food for their own families. if we if they could also perhaps grow a cash crop, usually not enough to be substantial, but enough extra to be able to trade it with either neighbors or somehow trade it to earn them extra money. If you think of Caroline in the mother in Little House on the Prairie, that she would go with her basket of eggs and take them to Mrs. Olson at the general store so that she could sell them on her behalf. Or maybe Mrs. Olson paid her for them and then collected the money from whoever she sold them to. Either way, that would be a cash crop, a little bit extra that you grow that is more than what your family needs, that you can either trade with someone or you can sell to someone. Commercial farming raises large cash crops for profit. Modern cities depend on commercial farming in order to supply food for the residents of the cities, who obviously do not have land where they can even think of growing their own crops, at least not enough to sustain their families. All farmers, whether they're small farmers, sustenance farmers, or big commercial farmers, face the same challenges. They face the challenges of drought and disease, insect plagues, windstorms, hail, floods, loss of soil and nutrients from heavy rains and heavy winds. um, Whether it's one or the other, from animals, insects, all farmers face the same challenges. and different regions meet those challenges in different ways. There have been great improvements in insecticides and methods of irrigation, in breeding animals and that kind of thing, that have really made farming much more profitable and yield larger crops. But still, those challenges that I mentioned still affect all kinds of farmers, small and large. Animal husbandry, the second part of agriculture, is can either be nomadic, or sustenance herding. It's called sustenance herding. Now, if sustenance farming is a person just trying to supply the needs of his family, then sustenance herding is very similar. A person that is herding or cattle or sheep, flocks of sheep, for the purpose of sustaining their own family. Usually we see that in lands that is not suited for farming, as I mentioned before, in the semi-arid lands. The land that is rugged and dry. When I was in Israel, we could see many, I'm saying many, not many, but we saw Bedouins that were traveling through the wilderness that we could see as we were traveling by bus from one place to another, with a flock of goats and or sheep following them. It just always amazed me that they could live in that that very barren wilderness, which they do, and they know where to find the water, both for themselves and for their flocks, and they know where the pastures are, where they can move their herds and flocks from one pasture to another. Considering the pastures of Israel are very different from our pastures here. Here, our farmers can leave their cattle and sheep in a pasture, in a meadow, for weeks at a time, and they can just keep on eating down what is there. In Israel and in the Middle East, that's not the case. They need to move their flocks and herds from one pasture to another, because it doesn't take them long to eat down the grasses that are actually in a particular pasture. Wealthy landowners can do what is called ranching. They have ranches where they let their herds and flocks graze on enclosed parcels of land, fences that would keep their herds and flocks on their own land. Free range is very different, or open range, actually, open range. Free range has to do with chickens. Open range has to do with ranchers who allow their herds and flocks to graze on government land and without fences that contain them. The ranchers periodically need to round up their cattle to be branded or to shipped to market. Or in the case of sheep, they need to round up their flocks so that they can be sheared of their wool. So that's animal husbandry. And that pretty much is the category that is covered under agriculture, the farming and the animals. The second category is fishing and forestry, the broad category of fishing and forestry. Fishing, I'm going to take separately than mining. We'll deal with that separate. But both of them actually differ from agriculture in that fishing and mining both extract the resources from the Earth's crust itself. Farming is not like that. Crops need to be sowed or planted, and animals need to be bred and managed. They don't come up out of the earth. But in fishing and mining, that utilizes the resources that are contained within the Earth's crust. Fishing is actually the second largest commodity after oil. Oil is the largest commodity. The word commodity just means a raw raw material or a primary agricultural product that can be bought and sold, such as coffee or oil or fish. Fishing can be divided into two varieties, either fish or seaweed. Seaweed is used for food. We know what fish is used for. Fish actually also can be used for fertilizers, as seaweed can be used for fertilizers, cosmetics, food additives. It's a big business, especially in China and Japan and South Korea, which are the largest producers of seaweed. Um, Fishing utilizes two primary methods to obtain the product, either a capture, which is fishing, fishing for fish, either in the wild or in the natural state, wherever it is that they are found, or in aquaculture. Aquaculture being cultivating a controlled, unnatural environment, an artificial environment. When you go to Costco and you buy salmon, for example, it will either be labeled wild or it will be labeled farmed. Wild means that it's caught in its natural environment, and farmed obviously means that they are grown in an artificial environment in fish farms. The second of those, the second of the major um, categories is forestry. It's a very important industry, and we think, well, forestry means that it just supplies wood, but trees supply much more than just wood. They supply whatever it is that that tree produces. Could be nuts, fruit, any kind of food product that is grown on trees. The leaves are used, different leaves from different trees are used for furniture polish, car wax, crayons, lipsticks, medicines, different fragrances. Those can come from the leaves of different trees. Branches can be used for chemicals and plastics and paper products. The bark is used for mulch. When we go and we buy mulch from the nursery, the nursery, we can buy birch bark or pine bark or whatever. Where that's how that is some part of the tree that is utilized in forestry. Some parts of the bark from some trees are used for medicines and dyes and shoe polish, believe it or not. The trunks, obviously, are logged and cut into logs and boards for furniture, to make musical instruments, plywood, baseball bats, charcoal, lots of different things. The sap of certain trees can be used for different adhesives, for hairspray and soaps and cough syrups, even. And the stumps can be ground up, and wood resin can be extracted from the stumps for turpentine and pine cleaners. So forestry is a whole lot more than just cutting down trees and taking them to the sawmill and having them cut into boards. There are a lot of parts of the tree that are utilized in the forestry business. Mining, I'm actually just going to start on the subject of mining because there's a lot to be known about mining. As a matter of fact, mining is more important economically than either farming or fishing. And so that's kind of a long chapter, and we'll divide it up so that we don't have to plow through it all today. But there are three types of resources that are mined. The first one are metals. The second one is non-metal minerals. And the third one is fossil fuels. And we're not even going to get to the non-metal minerals or the fossil fuels today. That will be for our next lesson. But today we are going to talk about metals. Um, the Earth's crust is made up mostly of rock that contains all kinds of minerals. Scientists have discovered or found over 3,000. They've identified over 3,000 minerals, but there are only about 100 that are common. A mineral is a solid inorganic material or substance that occurs naturally, that has a unique chemical composition. And you'll kind of see how that definition plays out as we talk about the different minerals of the different metals that we're going to be referring to today. Metals are useful minerals that have four useful properties. The four useful properties of any metal are, first of all, it's shiny. It's malleable, which means that it can be hammered into sheets. It is ductile, which means that it can be drawn into wire. And it is conductive, which means that it's able to conduct electricity. Obviously, some metals are better at some of these things than others, but they are the four useful properties that all metals have. And I verified this with Peepaw because he knows a whole lot more about this kind of thing than I do. And he verified that, yes, indeed, they are the four useful properties of all metals, although they vary from one to the other. The three types of metals are precious metals, common metals, and alloys. And we're not even going to talk about alloys today. We're going to be talking about precious metals and common metals. Precious metals, can you name me a precious metal? There are actually three primary ones: gold, silver, and platinum. The production of those is in much smaller quantities than some of the other metals that we're going to be talking about today. But their value is much higher. They are much higher value singularly than the other metals. They're considered precious because of either their beauty or their durability, or because they are scarce, or because they have great trade value. So that is what makes a precious metal considered to be precious. Common metals are much more common. They are mined in much greater quantities. Copper, lead, and iron are the three major common metals. They are also like the precious metals. They are found in as pure nuggets in the Earth's crust. Copper is a native metal. That was the term I was looking for. A native metal means that it can be found in pure nuggets in the Earth's crust. And a copper is one of those, as is gold and silver. 60% of copper is used in the electrical industry as an inexpensive conductor of electricity. Lead is not found in pure form. It needs to be extracted from its ore, O-R-E. A definition of an ore is a mineral that is made up of several different elements. In the case of lead, lead is mixed with sulfur and galena. I think that's how you pronounce it. Galena. Galena or galena. I'm not sure. I should look it up. And lead is the basic ingredient used in car batteries. Iron, more iron is mined in 1 year's time than all other metals combined. I'll repeat that in case you dozed off. Iron is mined more more iron is mined in a year's time than all other metals combined. It is also processed from an ore, just like lead is. It requires very high temperatures in order to separate it from the other elements in the ore. Actually, temperatures of almost 3,000 degrees are required to separate it from its ore. Iron is obviously very useful in vehicles, cars, trucks, SUVs, semis, RVs, buses, trains, also used in appliances, refrigerators, and washing machines and such. Also used in utensils, knives, forks, and spoons, and for medical purposes. In stainless steel, we'll talk a little bit more about stainless steel in a while, but for different devices that are used in the medical field, iron is very, very important. Aluminum is the second most common metal on Earth. It's very difficult to extract from its ore, which is called bauxite, Bauxite, a mixture of oxygen, hydrogen, and aluminum. Very difficult to extract aluminum. Electrical currents are used as opposed to the high temperatures that are used in iron. Electrical currents are used to separate aluminum from the other elements in its ore. The advantages of aluminum is that it's very lightweight, and it is resistant to corrosion, as opposed to iron, which rusts. Aluminum is very resistant to corrosion. It's ideal for aircraft, where lightness would be important, and for cars and for other machines. Now, those metals that we've just mentioned are very useful in and of themselves, but they are also used in combination with other metals. And when we are combining one metal with another metal, that's called an alloy. And we're going to stop there and I'll talk a little bit offline about these things that we've talked about today. And then next time we will go further and talk about alloys. See you then.